and welcome to this week's video. Today I want to show you why brushwork shouldn't be treated as one fixed style. Using this cat portrait as an example, we'll look at how changing your brushwork for different surfaces, from soft fur to rough fabric, can make a painting feel more convincing and alive. Let's jump straight in. Number 1, why brushwork is not just about mark making. Most of the time when people talk about brushwork, they talk about it as a style, as if it's fixed personal signature that you apply fairly consistently across a painting. I don't think about brushwork that way at all. For me, brushwork is a descriptive tool. It has to change depending upon what I'm actually painting because different surfaces behave completely different and ask for different things. This painting is a perfect example of that. A tabby cat lying on a woolly mat. Two surfaces right next to each other that could not be more different in character. Soft fur against rough synthetic fabric. Number 2, it's not the brush, it's how you use it. Before I get into the painting itself, I want to tell you something that might surprise you. I really only use 3 brushes, a flat synthetic, a long-haired comber and a small round brush. That's it. I think a lot of painters assume that getting different effects requires a huge range of specialist brushes, and there is nothing wrong with that approach. It works for many, but it is not how I work. For me, it is far less about which brush I am holding and much more about how I'm using it, my hand action, how much paint I have loaded on it, if I have added medium, and whether that paint is opaque or transparent. The flat synthetic is my workhorse. It is good for scumbling, for loading paint onto the canvas, for expressive flicking strokes, and it gives me a real range of edges depending upon how I use it. When it gets wrecked and the bristles splay out, it's still useful for smoothing out hard edges. It can pull paint off your canvas when Alla Prima painting. The long-haired comber is softer and behaves very differently. It is brilliant for pulling edges into other edges, for blending and for creating that gentle transition you need in something like fur. It won't pull paint off your canvas when Alla Prima painting. The small round brush is reserved for detail, precise controlled marks in small specific areas. I'll use this for the eyes. However, there are other factors that will affect my brushwork. Opaque paint and transparent paint behave differently under the same brush, and your hand has to adjust accordingly. Opaque paint is harder to manipulate. It sits and holds its shape. Transparent paint moves and mixes much more easily on the canvas. And your physical approach matters just as much as the brush or the paint. Being gentle and precise will never give you a rough, energetic effect, no matter what brush you are holding. The hand action has to match the result you are after. So as we go through this painting, notice that it is never really about which brush I picked up, it is about the decision behind it. Number 2, painting the mat. Rigorous quick strokes with the flat synthetic. Let's start with the mat. It took me a few attempts to get this right. Very often you may find that getting the effect you want doesn't happen on the first go. I used my flat synthetic for this area. Ideally, you want one that's fairly new and the sharp edge is still intact. But the important thing here is not the brush itself, it is the hand action I used with it and the angle that you hold it at. Ideally, you want the edge held at an angle at either 2 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Woolly texture needs energy and speed. I worked with rigorous quick strokes, rolling the brush in my fingers as I laid the strokes, which is what actually gives you that broken woven quality rather than a smooth painted surface. I was using a lot of transparent paint for this area, and that was a deliberate choice. Transparent paint manipulates much more easily on the canvas, so rather than mixing my colours carefully on the palette first, I let a lot of that mixing happen directly on the surface as I worked. The colours I used were transparent yellow oxide, then a purple mixed from alizarin crimson, transparent red oxide and ultramarine deep. If you look at a lot of these areas, you'll see the paint has just mixed on the canvas. Adding the purple and the yellow and some white together has allowed the grey to just mix naturally in certain areas, and it has the beautiful quality that you only get with transparent paint. Remember mixing complementaries, i.e. opposite colours like yellow and purple, and adding white will give us a grey. As the mat gets lighter, I just add more white to the mix and lay it over my colours. Because the white is opaque, it begins to pull up the transparent colour a little, and it helps give that blended effect without too much difficulty. If I had mixed those colours smoothly on the palette and then applied them carefully, I would not have got that textural effect. There is a certain amount of just going for it and being prepared to wreck your painting. But the more you practice this, the more control you'll have. I may not get the effect I want first time around, but I no longer wreck the painting if I don't. Painting the fur using multiple brushes. This is where it begins to get a bit tricky, as I have to balance correct brushwork with correct value, temperature, colour and edges. The cat is much harder to paint than the mat, so straight away my approach has to change completely. I still started with the flat synthetic because I needed to load the paint onto the canvas first, and it is a much better brush for that. But the movement of my hand is different. I am now laying paint and spreading it a little bit like you would butter on toast. I am keeping the paint sketchy but opaque and patchy. Because I am having to balance so many elements in one go, I know my first guess at what I am seeing will be wrong, and I will most likely need to correct it. It is easier to correct thin and patchy paint. If you have laid it too thick, you'll have to scrape it back for the correction. Getting that tabby colour is actually quite tricky. I really have to move around my palette with my complementaries. I use yellow and purple. My purple is always a mix of these two plus white, but my yellow changes between yellow ochre light, cadmium yellow light and transparent yellow oxide. I also use red and green. My green is either this one or Viridian. My red is either this one, any of these reds on my palette, or this one. Using complementaries helps me get that warm, cool effect you can see throughout the fur. Whilst I'm thinking about my colours, I'm also thinking about my brushwork. You'll notice on the time-lapse video that I change brushes quite often between my flat synthetic or my long-haired combers. When dealing with the white paint, I generally find my flat synthetic to be better choice because the paint is too opaque to be laid effectively with my combers. But when I get to my shadow areas, I can swap back to my combers and brush the paint gently over the white. Corrections are easier as I just keep laying the transparent paint over with the comber until I get the right value. I have stuck with my yellow and purple combination to give me my warm, cool shifts. Number 4, the small round brush, where precision belongs. After all that loose, energetic work on the mat and the fur, the eyes needed something completely different, and that is where the small round brush come in. This is the only place in the entire painting where I wanted real precision and control. Everywhere else has to be about energy, texture and movement, but the eyes are where the personality and focus of the cat actually live. A small round brush gives you that control, a steady deliberate mark rather than anything broken or expressive. Precision helps the viewer focus on the eyes, and the tightness of the brushwork is a deliberate contrast to the looser painting of the rest of the picture. This is a good principle to take away more generally. You don't need to apply the same level of control across an entire painting. Decide where precision actually matters and concentrate it there, and let everything else breathe. Number 5, why switching brushwork is important. So let's bring it all together, because what I hope this painting demonstrates is that brushwork is never one fixed thing. It changes constantly depending upon what you actually are painting. The mat needed quick, rigorous, angled strokes with transparent paint mixing live on the canvas. The fur needed a complete change of pace, softer blending from the comber, switching back to the flat synthetic only where I needed density and volume in the white highlights. And the eyes needed a complete change again, slow, controlled, precise marks from the small round brush in total contrast to anything else around them. If I had used the same brush marks, the same paint and the same hand action throughout this entire painting, none of these surfaces would have felt distinct from each other. The mat would have looked like the fur would have looked like the mat, and the eyes would have had no special focus at all. This is really the heart of what I wanted to share today. It is never really about the brush itself. It is about constantly asking yourself what the surface in front of you needs and being willing to change your brush, your paint and your hand action to respond to that. If you would like to come and paint with me in oils, join my workshop on the 3rd of July. You'll find the link in the description below. There are also more details of lesson opportunities on my website, sarahhallidayart.com. If you found this video helpful, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss future painting tips. Thank you for watching and see you next week.